Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. At the launch of this most important research project, no one should grow up like this. My name is Dr. Peter Yanada Mackenzie. I'm a descendant and elder from the La Perouse Aboriginal community, which is situated on the shores of Botany Bay, right here in our Randwick City local government area. On behalf of the current Cadigal and La Perouse elders and community, I most warmly welcome you to our country, on which this university stands. The Welcome to Country is our contemporary interpretation of receiving visitors who seek permission to visit areas within our traditional lands, or as we call it, country. It is a ceremony recognising the cultural and spiritual connection to country and an opportunity to reaffirm our ongoing relationship to our land. This ceremony also gives us the opportunity to allow us to pay respect past to elders and to acknowledge those elders past and present, and to reflect on our shared history and build a vision for a prosperous, healthy and reconciled future. Our people have endured through vast changes to our landscape, to our livelihoods and to our lifestyles. However, through local Aboriginal Land Council networks, we are striving to deliver economic, culturally and most importantly, educational security through institutions like UNSW, while maintaining the ongoing spiritual relationships to our country. So again, we welcome you. On behalf of the La Perouse Local Aboriginal Land Council, myself and the traditional custodians, we wish you a safe passage back to your homes, secure in the knowledge that you are very, very welcome in our traditional country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that welcome to country, and I too pay my respects to elders past and present. It's a very poignant report that we're launching today. My role here is as chair, but also as we were a funding partner with the University of New South Wales in this report, and found it's very important that actually for an organisation like ACWA to have understanding of what is the history of this particular sector of ours, which is not always a pleasant one. But first of all, I'd like to actually welcome our very distinguished guests. We have Professor Susan Dodds, the Honourable Brad Hazard, the research team led by Elizabeth Fernandez, Mark Courtney, visiting from the US. My first very pleasant duty is to actually ask Professor Susan Dodds, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, University of New South Wales, to come and welcome us.
Good morning, and thank you, Andrew. I have a little bit of a cold, so if I stop breathing, and someone should help me along. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the Bedegal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be here today. So thank you, Andrew, for your kind welcome and introduction. And on behalf of the faculty, I'd like to welcome everyone who's here this morning, and those who'll come along during the morning, for the launch of the report, No Child Should Grow Up Like This, Identifying Long-Term Outcomes of Forgotten Australians, Child Migrants and the Stolen Generations, a research study on the life outcomes for children growing up in care in the 20th century Australia. In particular, we extend a warm welcome and pay special tribute to all of the research participants, those of you who have had first-hand experience of living in institutions and foster care as children. We thank you for sharing your important and very moving stories, memories, feelings, impressions, and experiences with the research team, and with the launch of this report, sharing those with the wider Australian community. Your accounts of the impact of care on the course of your lives has shaped the recommendations of the report and articulated what your needs may be. I'd also like to extend my welcome to you from our Vice-Chancellor, Ian Jacobs, who is not available to be here today. He writes, I'm delighted that UNSW is hosting the launch of the Long-Term Outcomes for Forgotten Australians report, and I'm disappointed not to be able to be with you here today. All at UNSW are proud of the work that our staff and students working in Long-Term Outcomes of Forgotten Australians report field through our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and in many ways, he sees this as a key aspect of our UNSW 2025 strategy. Universities have a critical role to play in important issues such as this, and that role has never been more important than now. This meeting, with a focus on research on the long-term outcomes of forgotten Australians, is of greatest importance. My thanks to all of those involved for their work in making this report possible, and I, Ian, wish you a very successful launch at UNSW today. So that's our Vice-Chancellor. The report is really important for a number of reasons, as he says. It highlights the importance of social research in building knowledge to underpin social policy. It demonstrates the ongoing need for university engagement with government, industry, and community to advance justice interests of marginalised and disempowered groups, such as forgotten Australians, child migrants, and members of the stolen generations. We welcome and thank the academics, child welfare practitioners, and administrators who have contributed to the development of this report in various ways. And I'm going to list a large number of people, and I apologize if anyone's been left off. The research team under Professor Elizabeth Fernandez, Principal Researcher, UNSW Australia, Dr. Jung Suk Lee, Chief Investigator, UNSW Australia, Professor Mark Courtney, Chief Investigator, University of Chicago, who will be speaking later today, Professor Mike Stein, Chief Investigator from the University of York, Hazel Blundell, Dr. Hazel Blundell, Blunden, Research Associate, University of Australia, University of New South Wales, Australia. I'm having a really good time with my acronyms today. Dr. Patricia McNamara, Research Associate, UNSW, Ms. Sylvia Kovacs, Research Assistant, UNSW, Mr. Paul Auguste Cornfort, Research Assistant, UNSW Australia, and our research partners, including the Association of Children's Welfare Agencies, as represented by Andrew, the Alliance for Forgotten Australians, Families Australia, Berry Street, Relationships Australia, and the Catholic Care Diocese of Broken Bay and Micah Projects. We thank the Australian Research Council for funding this important research project. Last but not least, we welcome our special guests today and thank them for taking time out of their busy schedules to be able to be with us. The Honourable Brad Hazzard, Minister for Family and Community Services, Robin Quiggin, the Deputy Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission, Marie Walk, Deputy Secretary, Department of Family and Community Services, Richard Hill, Chairman of Create Foundation, all of the people who are part of this research. And I know that some of you have travelled quite a long way to be with us here today. Karen Boland, New South Wales Children's Guardian, Professor Mark Courtney from the School of Social Services Administration, the University of Chicago, Alison Brooke, the CEO of Relationships Australia, Wendy Foote, Deputy CEO of the Association of Child Welfare Agencies, Uncle Steve Williams from the National Stolen Generations Alliance, Dr. Cherry Chenery, CEO of Link Up New South Wales, Dr. Paul Gray, Executive Leader, Strategy, Policy and Engagement, Aboriginal Child, Family and Community Care, State Secretariat, Dr. Tiffany McComsey, CEO of Kinchela Boys Home Aboriginal Corporation, Lily Arthur, Chairperson of Origins New South Wales, Prue Gregory, Principal Lawyer for No More. We also would like to thank you to senior colleagues from the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses for Child Sexual Abuse, Family and Community Services, New South Wales Health, and all the NGOs represented here today. So I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, the Honourable Brad Hazzard, Minister for Family and Community Services.
Thank you, Professor Dodds, and I appreciate that introduction, long as it was. Thank you. Could I also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Bedegal people of the Eora Nation, and thank them for their custodianship of land, 60,000 years of looking after this amazing land, and of course that now facilitates us being able to meet here and to launch this report. Can I also acknowledge Elizabeth Fernandez, who was the leader of the team, I think, and appreciate that, Elizabeth, for all the work you and your team did. Mark Courtney, who has just landed on a plane from Illinois, I think, only yesterday, so thank you, Mark, for coming in. Professor Mark Courtney from the University of Chicago. As it happens, we were together only the week before last, because I went to the US to look at some of the jurisdictions that have actually made an incredible difference in reduction of the number of children in care, and hopefully going to be able to apply some of those principles here. I'd also like to acknowledge David Hill, who, of course, as he correctly pointed out to me earlier, was never a politician, but I said to him he was always more political than I could ever be, but nevertheless, he certainly was one of the, if you like, the giants across our public stage. So thank you, David, and I think your brother Richard's here too, I'm not sure, but thank you for coming along. And all of the other special guests. Thank you to the University of New South Wales. It generously gave me a law degree many years ago, so anything that I can do to assist the University of New South Wales, I will gleefully do. And thank you for the University of New South Wales, the university's work with York University and the University of Chicago and the other bodies that Susan has just referred to in putting together this report. You know, the reality is that the 700 people, almost 700 people, who spoke to the researchers it would have been very difficult for each one of those people, or many of those people anyway, to speak about what happened to them. So I want to thank them. As Attorney General, I dealt with the issues around the government, the New South Wales government, and the way the officialdom, if you like, dealt with people who were wanting to make claims for compensation. And I was really disturbed to find that governments across Australia still relied on the approach that lawyers tend to take, and I'm a lawyer, so I understand that. But it wasn't the appropriate way to deal with people who have been so disadvantaged and so hurt. So we introduced, on my watch, we introduced a model litigant policy for the New South Wales government, which basically said, you know what, these people have had a tough time. Let's not rely on the law as such. Let's not look at the way we normally do things. And I'm very proud of that. Also, we did away with the statutory period that would have obviated or negated people's capacity to bring actions. And I'm hoping that all other jurisdictions across the country will do that at some point. Now, I have to say there's a great deal of goodwill. As Attorney General, I met with all the other Attorneys General across the country, the state and territory Attorneys General, and in a sense we're all working in an area that's difficult for all of us, but it's not as difficult as it is for the people who've experienced it. And there was that understanding amongst the Attorneys General across the country. So hopefully this research that's been put together will help each of the Attorneys General and each of the states and territories come up with a collaborative and coordinated approach that will assist some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Now, I'm particularly keen on this report because it also highlights what I intuitively knew, but it actually highlights some of the disadvantage that occurs in a range of areas, whether it's the intersection with the justice area, whether it's intersection with health or mental health or education. It's all highlighted through the conversations and discussions with the 700 participants, and I think the 20-odd forums that were held. Elizabeth, wasn't it about 20 forums? It's highlighted in this report, and it makes it clear that people who go into care aren't necessarily getting a very good outcome. And it doesn't matter, you know, whether it was the forgotten Australians, or whether it was the stolen generation, or whether it was the child migrants. They all found it difficult. There were very difficult circumstances. Now, in New South Wales, when I think it was 1995 or so, there were about 5,500 children in care in New South Wales. And now we're sitting at about 20,000. And the agency that I'm now the Minister for, and have been for the last 18 months or so, has been telling me that, Minister, we may be looking at around about another 1,500 to 2,500 a year going forward on top of that 20,000. And at the moment I'm saying, well, no, let's find another way to work with young people and families to support them if we possibly can in their homes. Now, I know there are some parents, some homes that are simply dangerous for children. I know that. But there are also a lot of homes where if we could put the resources and support into the family, we would find it to be markedly different. And that's what I was talking to Mark about and others just in the last 2 weeks, because Illinois has done an amazing job in reduction of its children, the number of children in care, as has the City of New York, not necessarily the whole state of New York, but the City of New York, as has Tennessee. And so this report that you have been working on and your team have been working on comes at a very opportune time from my point of view, because as the Minister here, I am saddened, appalled, horrified at the number of children we have in care, saddened, appalled, horrified at the number of children they're telling me will come into care, and I just find it remarkable that we have, Aboriginal people, our First Peoples, the people who actually looked after this continent for 60,000 years, it's just awful that we have around about 30%, 33%, about a third of all children in care in New South Wales who are Aboriginal. Now, how can we justify that? Population that identifies as Aboriginal is around about 2.5%, 3%. So the disproportionate representation is horrible, horrible. So from our point of view, I think that we need to be taking on board the government and governments across the country. This is a national perspective. Governments across the country need to be taking on board what this report does. I know that it's beyond politics, because my colleagues to the north and south, two Labor governments, Shannon Fennerman in Queensland and Jenny Mikakos in Victoria, are both equally concerned about the number of children in care. Jenny Mikakos has moved very quickly to reduce, I think by nearly 200 now, just in the last year and a half, the number of children in residential care. So this is a concern, and it should be a concern for the entire population of this country. So this report comes at a very, very good time. It comes at a time when governments are looking to see how can we get better outcomes for our young people who are not able to live at home, or those young people who have family lives that are problematic, but maybe there's a better way. Maybe we can support those families. And this sends a very clear message that all too often the outcomes of being in care are not positive. I want to thank the research team, I want to thank the universities, I want to thank their partners who actually has made this possible, and can assure you that this will certainly be a vital part of providing the metal, if you like, the steel, for being able to make challenges and changes, just to make changes, I should say, to the challenges that we have in front of us. And with that, I formally launch the No Child Should Grow Up Like This. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Minister. These reports, as interesting and as enlightening as they are only as good as what they actually lead us to do in the future. And we are not short of reports about what's happened across the particular community welfare sector across Australia over many, many years. I look back from my beginnings in the sector in the 70s at a campus in Melbourne, campus care in Melbourne. I ran a children's home at the time, and I look back in despair at what was actually happening when you actually, with the benefit of hindsight around this. I also sit on the advisory board for the Forgotten Australians and was interviewed for this report along those sort of things, and the pain is palpable. The pain of the people who have been through this is palpable, and that should be enough to say that this shouldn't happen into the future. But we know there are elements of it that still does happen into the future, and we also know that it's a systems issue. But it's an Australian society issue. Australia as a society has to get better at what it does and how it values children, and how we actually value, not just vulnerable children, how we value children generally will then actually dictate what we do with those who are most vulnerable. And I think that's one of the discussions we don't have well enough in this country. But to hear from the researchers, I'll ask Elizabeth and her team to take the stage.
Good morning to all of you. Minister Brad Hazzard, Dean Susan Dodds, Mark Courtney, Andrew, distinguished guests, and research participants. We're very pleased to have this opportunity to share with you some highlights from the research. During the 20th century, many Australian children spent a significant part of their childhoods in orphanages, in various institutions, in foster care, and various other kinds of care. And this study is an attempt to understand the range of their needs and experiences in care as well as after care. And the focus has been to take an inclusive approach and look at three groups who are known to us collectively as the Forgotten Australians, the former child migrants, and the members of the stolen generation. In his opening remarks, when Justice McClellan launched this study in February of 2015, he made these comments, which were up on the screen earlier. Now, most of the recent discussion about the treatment of children in institutional care has tended to focus on the 20th century, particularly the 1920s and 1930s. And it's for this reason that we focused on the study period of 1930 to 1990. There are good reasons for this. There are a number of living people, survivors, whose voices must be heard. And secondly, the legacy of their experience and some of the trauma and suffering that they endured is a pressing issue and needs to be addressed in order to provide justice and reparation to the forgotten Australians and also to their families. So this is one of the reasons why we undertook the study. The Royal Commission has reminded us of some of the lifelong impacts of child sexual abuse and of maltreatment generally. I must say that there has been previous work prior to the commencement of this study, and this work has informed our study, such as, for example, the inquiry into children in institutional care, the Forgotten Australians report, the Writing the Record, Child Migrants Lost Innocence report, as well as the Bringing Them Home report of 1997, which looked at the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. There have also been apologies to the Forgotten Australians, to the child migrants, and to the stolen generations, which have acknowledged their stolen childhoods in Australian care systems. In addition, there have been other important accounts from care leavers themselves and the work of CLAN in terms of their surveys. You have the 8-page summary with you, which details the aims of the study. So I'll move on to explain that in approaching this study, we used a mixed methods approach, which included a survey taken online or a paper-based one, and we had 669 participate in the survey, interviews and focus groups that were conducted across the country. So in addition to the various inquiries and efforts undertaken earlier, this study is yet another step in trying to understand the needs of this population, and the participants who are characterized as forgotten, in fact, through this study, given a voice, and we have tried to strengthen that voice through the research. There's also, while previous inquiries have been conducted, there is very little public knowledge about the circumstances and the lifelong impacts of the trauma that they've been through. Now, in terms of the participation, in terms of the outcomes, I might say that while the Royal Commission has limited its focus in terms of its terms of reference to child sexual abuse, this study has looked at the complete experience of individuals in care in the 20th century. And in that sense, we have looked at the fact that they had experienced high levels of neglect, maltreatment, and deprivation. Children, as you will see from the findings that will be discussed later, were violated in many different ways. Sexual abuse was one of those. In addition, there were extremes of physical abuse, extremes of neglect of schooling, also a high level of emotional abuse and trauma, and very arduous child labor that many of them undertook during their time in care. And hence, there are a number of wrongs that need to be responded to, given the gamut of maltreatment that they've been exposed to. Again, they were forgotten when they left care, because many of them went out without resources, without any supports, in order to, I guess, establish themselves in the community. Behind all these individual accounts, importantly, I think we need to recognize that in the broader political and social context, we see adults' power over children and the adults' ability to render invisible and inconsequential the experiences of children. And I think that is something to keep in mind. Finally, our findings will be used in order to advocate and promote the needs of this vulnerable population, to avoid repeating mistakes of the past, and also to provide a knowledge base from which responsive services can be developed. I'm very encouraged to hear the comments of Minister in terms of future support to these vulnerable groups, and we hope both state governments as well as federal government and non-government agencies will redouble their efforts to respond to the needs and challenges that confront this population in terms of embracing their collective responsibility towards the forgotten Australians, the child migrants, and the stolen generations. I will hand over to the rest of the research team who will highlight some of the major findings.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Patricia McNamara, and it's been my privilege to work on this project and help to manage the Victorian component of the Forgotten Australians project over the last couple of years. So thank you to the University of New South Wales for that opportunity. Well, why did people come into out-of-home care last century between 1930 and 1989? Interestingly, they came in to care mostly because of problems their parents were struggling with at the time. Many of the children who entered care actually came from loving homes, and I think that's something that's often misunderstood. Many of the parents whose children were placed, or who placed their children, so-called voluntarily. I don't think any parent who's sitting in this room would consider the placement of a child through poverty or through the mental illness of a parent or through homelessness or alcoholism. Was that voluntary? No, it was not. It was a tragedy. It was a separation that was painful for the parent and painful, enormously painful for the child, and continues to be painful for those children to this very day and will remain so for the rest of their lives. So, when the children entered care, no matter how young they were or how many times they entered care, they never forgot what that was like. They came to the grandparents' house, and the vision I have is of my mum wanting to commit suicide, wanting to harm herself because they were taking all of her children. They took me down to this bathroom. It was like in the movies with those big long shower rooms, the toilets on one side and the open showers. They just stripped me down in front of everyone and threw me into the shower and scrubbed me until it hurt. When the children entered care, the environment was often described to us as being like a prison. The institutions were run in a very regimented manner. Children were often only referred to by their surnames, sometimes even a number. And days were organised around a routine of work, and there was plenty of that, as we'll come to in a moment, mealtimes, school, such as it was, and work and then bed. Food was of a very low standard, and many participants have described to us how eating this often revolting food was used as a punishment. If you didn't eat it, you sat there until you did, basically. Even if it made you ill, you were forced to stay there, sometimes all night. It's kind of reminiscent of fiction more than reality, perhaps some of Dickens' stories. Absolutely, absolutely. And there was no attention to the developmental needs of the children. Do you know we had no books? There were absolutely no storybooks whatsoever. We didn't have toys. We even heard of children being given toys, for example, at Christmas and then being asked to return those toys. So children more deserving, apparently, could receive such toys. There were also, kids were moved around so much. And we know now, and I think people would have had some idea at that time too, that moving children the age of 4, 5 or even younger multiple times. In this case, I moved every year as a child from the age of 4 or 5 till when I was 13, moved every year to a different family home. So I know about packing my bags, said Merrill. So disruptive to children who, in many cases, had experienced earlier attachment disruption from their family of origin. And schooling. Someone who's been a teacher since I was 21 years old, and that was not yesterday, it is a great shame for me to learn how poor the education was that was provided for children in out-of-home care last century. And actually, I'm not too sure that we've moved as far as we should have done by this point in time in improving education for children in out-of-home care and for children leaving care in creating opportunities for further education. Many children attended school. The schools were run, for example, in many cases by religious orders who were teachers. But the quality of education was appallingly poor, and the outcomes were poor. Children who attended school within institutions in the earlier part of the research period usually left school by the age of 15. It had lifted a little bit later in the research period, but outcomes were still poor because the children were not feeling safe at school. They had very little encouragement. Just as I entered the aeroplane to fly up from Melbourne this morning, I was speaking with my son who was getting his VCE results in Victoria. And fortunately, we've all breathed a sigh of relief in our family. But it's been a really tough year for him and for all of us. He's adopted, so the first couple of years of life were not too easy for him. And when I think back on the hard year that we've spent and feel so proud of his survival and resilience, I think, wow, how much went into that too, to support him with teachers around him. We've tried to do our bit. These kids had none of that. How could they possibly have good outcomes? Okay. What about labour? These kids worked their guts out, basically. They were up before dawn in the dark, carrying water, lighting fires, ironing. I never really knew from the age of 10 how to just be a little girl. I always had chores from getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning before anyone got up. I had to have so many uniforms ironed, perhaps in those dreadful Magdalen laundries, as they were described, ironed from morning and night. That was Meg's experience. And around education, as Lewin said, what education? My educational potential was like my childhood. It was stolen. I don't know what I could have been. I had no education. I was taken out of school before I turned 14, and I was sent to work on a dairy farm. It was my privilege, but also my great pain, to sit with participants in this study as they described to a social worker of 40 years' experience who thought she knew something about maltreatment and abuse, their experiences. I actually knew very little, I discovered. In the year or so that I interviewed people around abuse and maltreatment in out-of-home care last century, I was deeply moved and very much ashamed. Every possible form of abuse was described to us. Perhaps some of the hardest to hear about was emotional abuse. Some people have told us that's what they're finding hardest to deal with. That you're not going to amount to anything. No one wants you and no one knows you're there. No one cares you're there. And I also found hearing about isolation extremely painful. They whipped me. When I tried to escape, they stood me in a concrete cell for 4 days and whipped me so many hours in 4 days, said Michael. And sexual abuse, of which we are hearing so much in the Royal Commission, was as common as bricks in a wall. If someone said they were not in any way sexually active, especially in the government children's homes, I'm sorry. I just have to say that's the perfect children's home, and I've never heard of it. I'm just going to hand over now to Jung Suk.
Thank you. Very sad to hear all those experiences. Now I'm going to talk about experience of living care and life after care. So here, at the time of living care, participants were 15 years old on average, and many of them, over half of them, reported that they were not prepared at all to live independently at the time. And many participants described the process of living care as being shown the door. They were given basic supplies, such as clothes or a small amount of money, and they were often alone and without a place to stay. Okay, yeah. And first few months were very difficult for them. And as shown here, they experienced the difficulties in all these areas. Here, 1 means very easy, and 5 means very difficult. As you can see, all these areas. And for many participants, there was no help. And around half of participants said they did not have anybody to call for help at the time. And now let's look at life outcomes after care. Despite all these difficulties, many study participants showed remarkable resilience, yet many suffered the consequences. After transitioning from care, many caregivers pursued further training and education. Despite the lack of formal schooling while in care, 24% obtained at least one post-secondary qualification. And regarding their employment, as expected, 90% of caregivers aged 65 or older were not in the labor force. However, as you can see from here, under 55, even under 55, many participants are not in employment. So caregivers in this study experienced high levels of material hardship compared to the general community. One comparison is given here. So if you look at this graph, the red is study sample and blue is community sample. For example, if you look at percentage of going without meals because they did not have enough money, you can see big difference. And also many participants experienced housing difficulties. 46% of study participants said they experienced homelessness at some point in their lives. Nearly half of respondents were married or in a de facto relationship at the time of survey. This graph shows the effects of care experiences on their intimate relationships. As you can see here, inability to trust was a major issue. So for them, not trusting others was an adaptive mechanism in childhood, but it had a lifelong persistence. However, support of a partner was identified as important, and some participants described as saved my life and my rock. 85% of participants had children, and participants reported that parenting was complex and a source of resilience and anxiety. As this graph shows, participants reported positive effects as well as negative effects of care experiences on parenting. Many participants said they wanted to be a good parent and they wanted to keep a family together. In some cases, however, an intergenerational pattern was observed. 17% reported that their parents had a history of being in care, and 13% of participants had their children taken into care. This graph shows physical and mental health outcomes. I would like to draw your attention to the mental health outcome here. As you can see, the bar here, 59% reported having mental illnesses, and 86% of them considered their mental illnesses were related to their care experiences. And 76% reported flashbacks, and 65%, almost two-thirds of them had suicidal ideations at some point in their lives. And 39%, one-third of them had attempted suicide at some point in their lives. And particularly, younger female caregivers under 65, they reported an alarming level of suicidal ideations, 86%. We also looked at K10, the Kessler Psychological Distress Scale. Compared to two community samples, caregivers in this study reported much higher levels of psychological distress. For example, when percentage of people in the very high distress category, here purple section, if you look at that section, percentage in this study is 8.5 times greater than percentage in 2007 Hilda study, and 14.4 times greater than another national study. So this shows the seriousness of mental illness, mental health problems among caregivers in this study. It is likely that these physical and mental health problems contributed to problems in their employment, relationships, and other parts of their lives. Now I will pass on to Hazel.
Thanks, Jong-Suk. And
This report has a lot of data in it, and Jong Suk is responsible for a lot of that, and I think it strengthens the report and makes it more evidence-based. Thanks everybody for coming today. It's nice to see so many people that Trish and I both talked to, and we hope this report is of use. So I'm just going to turn to the recommendations within the report, so what should be done from this, okay? Now we have 24 recommendations in the report, and this covers many, many aspects of the findings and what you told us, basically. And these recommendations were run past reference groups, so we had some people from the study who helped us with the final recommendations, as well as people working in the field, a lot of the people here today from the research partners. So these we tried to capture what came out of what you said. The first big one is that the National Scheme of Redress, which has been announced by the Social Services Minister, Christian Porter, it is welcomed. This is a scheme, a National Scheme of Redress. However, we'd like to see this scheme to be compulsory, not opt-in. We'd like to see all those institutions and state governments who had the responsibility for children to live up to their responsibilities, basically, okay? Now, the Royal Commission's remit doesn't extend beyond sexual abuse. However, given there will be a national scheme, it's worth giving some thought to making that scheme cover all forms of abuse, not just sexual abuse, okay? Another big one, which has been talked about for a long time, is status as a special needs group, which would give people access to services. So if redress has three elements, one is monetary compensation, the second is an apology, the third needs to be access to services. So to facilitate that, we need low-cost access to health, education and the aged care services that people need. So we need a comprehensive package of services for people who are in care and who are still suffering today. Okay, some other recommendations that in particular that these services be tailored to what people need. So they should be not a one-size-fits-all, but flexible and to what you need in your life. So if you want to go back and study at university, okay, how can we facilitate that? If you have the need for a new set of dentures, how can we actually facilitate that? So we need our Find and Connect services to continue. We need the Stolen Generation survivor organisations to continue. We need Link Up to have funding, and we need all these other people who've got ideas about other ways to heal, and those services need to be given due consideration also.
I think we need to monitor every year the Find and Connect and the relationships Australia, all the people that are giving and money. They need to be reviewed by us. We need a board that we get to talk to them rather than they
Yep,
talk to us.
I hear you. Okay, so another one of our recommendations is that the people using all the services and whose lives are affected should have say over how policies are developed. Absolutely. Okay, in terms of aged care, we need to look at the support needs that you have as you age to minimise the chance of you ending up in another institution. So where a high level of care is necessary, we need to ensure those arrangements don't replicate the aspects you were exposed to as children. Okay, and I pay tribute to Alliance for Forgotten Australians, who I know have been working hard around this subject. Now, we're in a university today and we've seen the outcomes in terms of education are not great. How can we improve those pathways into the universities? How can we meet people's aspirations and ensure people get access to the education they deserve? Okay, the key messages from this study are as follows. Okay, the majority of you experienced abuse and neglect while you were in care, and you had difficulties transitioning out of care because there was a lack of support. Notwithstanding all these things, many of you showed astonishing resilience and you've gone on to help other people. And I know so many of you here have volunteered, you help each other, you help peers, you help kids as well. However, many challenges still exist in your everyday lives as a consequence of your experiences. We'll need ongoing specialist services. We'll need financial support, not for 1 year or 2 years, but ongoing. We need to look at the ageing population and we need to
hear from you about what aged care you feel comfortable with, and we just need these practical supports throughout the rest of your life so you can live your life hopefully with more dignity. The redress needs to be available to all, no matter what type of abuse they suffered and what state or territory. A lot of these lessons from this report come into children in care now, and I'll skip over those. And our final message is just to say thank you to everybody who participated in this research. It's a very large research project. It's got a lot of weight, we hope. And we hope this research assists you in gaining acknowledgement of the harms that you experienced, gaining access to the services you need, and supports your aspirations for justice. Thank you.
The voice of lived experience is extremely important in this, and I'll ask three people to come to the stage right now. We have, I'll just lost my place. We have Alan Louise Bucello, Dr. Gregory Smith, and David Hill and Martha Watts. Would they like to come to the stage?
Okay, how's that? All good? Well, I've always wanted to stand behind a lectern and be here, you know, down at the front part of a lecture theatre like this, but with the salary that goes with it. But that's not going to be that way today. I'm a forgotten Australian. I'm proud. I've survived. I've written a snapshot, a very brief snapshot. I've got 7 minutes to present this to you. This is my story, okay? And I'd like to firstly say, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely grateful that I was invited by Professor Fernandez from the School of Social Sciences to share a brief but poignant snapshot of my childhood internment as a then New South Wales Ward of the State. The weight is heavy on my shoulders today, surrounded by academics, but I assure you, as a survivor of childhood abuse, I can add invaluable insight to the launch of this report as a forgotten Australian. 2 years ago, I spent half a day with Dr. Hazel Blunden, bearing my heart and soul of those days long ago, where at the tender age of 5, I entered state ward care along with my 2 siblings. At that time, I commenced a journey that no child should ever experience. A journey over 8 years that saw me visit 5 foster placements and 3 institutions without my siblings. A childhood of moving from place to place, not belonging, having regular beatings, and that was with a cat and nine tails whip, of attending school with blisters on my spine and on my backside, to a principal that said, "We cannot tell anybody about this, it's none of our business." Of being forced to sleep outside on a veranda with my arms tied behind my back and told you can eat like a dog because you are nothing but a dog. Of being locked in cupboards, being left alone at the age of 8 years old with an elderly male family friend so that I could be seeded to grow into a beautiful, strong flower. My first experience with child sexual abuse. These are just a few things that come to mind. There are many, many more. At some stage in that journey, I decided not to make friends anymore, as I kept being moved around from place to place and school to school. One hot summer's day prior to my 13th birthday, my foster mother phoned the then welfare department to see about my high school uniform, and she was informed, "Oh, tell Ellen to pack her things, she's going home today." She would be there in the afternoon to pick me up. That was the welfare lady. I guess by this time I had become numb, having travelled through life like a tumbleweed as nobody's child. Although this was a turning point in my life, I went from no love to being absolutely smothered by love and kindness in all that seemed so false to me. From my sister and my mother. Here I was with a sister and mother I did not know, and a stepfather who I was to call Dad. There was no transition back into that environment to people I didn't even know. The turning point in my life was when I finally had my own children. The sun glowed brighter for me, and I felt I finally had it all. Over the years, I saw counsellors, psychiatrists for depression, and as my children grew, my world started to fall apart again. Travelling home from work on the 16th of November 2009, listening to the news, it was broadcast that the apology to forgotten Australians and child migrants had been made that day. I was unaware till that day that our government even cared about children in care. I cried inconsolably on the train, just knowing that perhaps now, maybe I will be believed. I returned to New South Wales in August 2015 after a breakdown at work to be near my family. But as is too familiar a story with forgotten Australians and child migrants, family relationships are strained. My children, having been overdosed with my mental health conditions and dramatic childhood, has left an emotional strain on our family, and the foundations were weak, causing an intergenerational overload. I started making contact with other like-minded people at last. I could connect to a group of people who had similar outcomes, similar stories, and through Lotus Place and Wattle Place, I have found a place where I belong with others to whom I often refer to as my brothers and sisters. I have witnessed firsthand the difficulties this disadvantaged group of people face when trying to seek help, having to retell their stories over and over, which means reliving experiences every single time. Many have lost so much and they have gained so little in this lifetime. In closing today, I referenced my list of wants. It was going to be a wish, but I thought, no, I'm going to say I want for once. In the hope that it will assist forgotten Australians and child migrant groups to receive some respite. The first is that all tiers of government introduced through legislation that forgotten Australians and child migrants may tick a box and be recognised and be acknowledged as a disadvantaged group similar to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. This will hopefully eliminate the need for me, as well as my brothers and sisters, to continually relive the past, and will facilitate the reader to be aware of mental health, housing, educational and welfare needs. Secondly, that funds be provided especially for the development and implementation of training and educational modules about the groups identified in this report. The Department of Education, along with the providers of services, ensure the content to be correct and accurate, and such a training module be under the Australian Quality Framework. The said module must be included in training any person in any profession that deals with human services. And where possible, that training be delivered to Commonwealth departments by specialised and trained people from or with association to these very groups. Last but not least, that all forgotten Australians and child migrants have access to a range of freely listed dental, medical, housing and mental health needs. This is a priority due to our average age, and that it be legislated that the disadvantaged group be given a health card as priority access. I realise our government have already put some things into action. If it were not for a certain unnamed person in No More, I would be here no more. that person swung into quick action to arrange long-term support from New South Wales Attorney General's Department as I was identified as a victim of crime. At 64 years old, I'm starting to recover. Now all I need is my family back, and I would love a companion dog, something that I can love. Something to help me through each day, through my complex post-traumatic stress that I have and my borderline personality disorders. But with a hefty amount of $2,000 to train a companion dog, I doubt the latter will transpire. Thanking you all today for listening, and I wish you all well. Thank you.
We might go to Martha, and Martha might just sit down here. You want to use this?
First of all, I would like to, it's not even on, is it? No, go closer. Right, okay, because it's foreign to me. I would like to thank the people that invited me over here, and it's an honour and a privilege for me to be here, and I'm so blessed to be. And again, I would like to acknowledge the people that own the land that we meet on today. So anyway, I'll start off with my name. Hello, my name is Auntie Martha Watts, and I'm a proud Arabana elder from Cuddy Thunder, or as you might call it, Lake Eyre, in northern South Australia. I come from a community of strong Arabana women, and I think it is important for me to speak to you people today so that you can hear it from me and not just read it in a book. So you can hear about my life and my family life from me. I was born into a loving family on country. My grandmother was very, very important in my life. She was a culturally important person and a leader. I can remember as a child, before I was kidnapped, not stolen, I was kidnapped. We went camping, we were very self-sufficient. We had our language, and my grandmother used to make a fire, put hot ashes under our swags, and then it would be like a hot water bottle today, as we call it. We were happy and healthy children living on country. I was out hunting and gathering, we were out hunting and gathering for food with my family when I was living with my family and attending school. At a mission, I was taken from my happy home into a missionary home by force. I was kept in after school because the teacher or the so-called missionary told me in front of all the other children that I was dumb. I didn't have anything happening for me. This was so he could sexually abuse me each and every day. I was too terrified to say anything because no one was listening to me. I was afraid. I kept my mouth shut, but I was scared that something bad would happen to my brothers, my younger brothers and sisters. These abusive people, so-called, wanted to foster me. My father and mother did not sign any papers or agree with them taking me, but they still did it. With the help of the welfare and the police, when they took me, it was like a death in the family. There was wailing and crying. The whole community was there. Excuse me. there to support my parents. Excuse me. But it didn't stop the police and the welfare and the missionaries from kidnapping me. They took me on the Flying Doctor plane on a so-called holiday to Broken Hill. My parents didn't know where I was. I had gone. Then by train, I was taken here to Sydney, Newcastle, and then back to Adelaide. Excuse me? Yes. Yeah. All in all, I was in 7 or 8 different places in Adelaide, and the abuse still continued from the missionaries when I was supposed to be in care. The government put me into school in Adelaide, but I hated it. I could not settle. I was missing my family. I was traumatised, and I still am. I ran away at 14 with a friend to find my family, my parents, but they reported me missing, and the police were waiting for me at this train station. I only saw my parents briefly before I was sent back to Adelaide. Yes, my childhood can never, ever be replaced. This is the time I should have been with my parents, my grandparents, and my extended family. I always had my culture in me, in my heart. They didn't take that away from me. But I could practice it, but it kept me strong during these hard times. Excuse me, sorry. I can't even open the paper. Strong. You took 2 pages, but I kept. Strong during these hard times. At 17 years of age, I left Adelaide and went back up to Maori, up north. I saw my mother and father briefly. The time I had spent away was like an eternity. When I went back, I felt like an outcast. It took a while for the family to talk again. I could not talk about what happened to me. When I got back, I went camping out bush under the stars with my parents, grandparents, aunties and uncles. We went hunting. We cooked their culture, kangaroo tails and damper in the ashes, and enjoyed a billy tea. I felt I'm home. I was home with my family on country. I was only home for 18 months when my mother died at a very young age. Sorry. I was blessed to have that time with her. But the time I spent away was time we could never get back, so we missed out on a lot of mother-daughter relationship and time. I met my husband when I was 21 years of age, nearly 50 years ago, over 50 years actually. We married and had 3 beautiful children. He was my support and guidance throughout our lives. Continues to be there for me in our mid-70s. I feel proud that I have made a safe place for me and my children, because I was not able to talk about things with my children. I kept a lot of it to myself to protect them. I was too traumatised, and I still am. I went on to work in early childhood and did volunteer work helping Aboriginal kids in schools and supporting families. I was also on the National Sorry Day Committee representing South Australia. I wanted to get out there to help our people and make sure children are safe. The government needs to do more to acknowledge what happened and how it affected many of the stolen generation and their families. And they are battling, and it's hard. Through the generations, the effect is going on generation after generation. Government needs to think about how they can help us. We want a healing place where we can go and feel safe, where people can go and have a cuppa and a yarn and support each other. I'm going to keep pushing for this. It is important to help our people who were stolen, kidnapped, call it, and still suffering, as I am, and many others of my brothers and sisters out there. I am pursuing this. Sorry. Oh, gosh. It's there. I'm pursuing this as an ambassador, elder, on the board of the Stolen Generation Corporation of South Australia. People need to love and support. People need love and support. We know in our hearts the way we need to be healed culturally and spiritually. They tried to take our culture away, but it was always in us and always will be, and they will never take that away. Gosh, sorry. We need to work together. It's going to be a long road. It's always been for us. I'm talking on behalf of the stolen generation today, but I empathise with all of you that have been through this terrible experience as I have. We are not going to give up on justice for all people. I thank you all for listening to me, Auntie Martha, and I'm sorry that I got upset and spoiled.
Thank you very much. We might move on to, Dr. Gregory Smith. Do you want to move up there, or?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Aunty Martha, and thank you, Ellen, who so eloquently put forward our most forgotten Australians and child migrants wants. I fully support those. I did have a speech and I threw it away because I just wanted this to come from the heart, really. Now, I am a forgotten Australian. I was surrendered into an orphanage at age 10. I was treated as most children were treated back in that time. The demand was to be seen and not heard and obey. I was a victim of the Sisters of Mercy, whose simple philosophy was you needed to break the spirit of a child that the spirit may enter. I experienced a lot of time in isolation, locked up in cupboards, and I was one of those children that ran away. I couldn't accept what was happening, and with no answers, and I ran away. As a result of that, I ended up in the punitive system, and I remained in the punitive system until I was age 19. During that period, I learned how to march, I learned how to fold clothes, I learned how to live by myself in a concrete cell, afraid of other people. When I left that institution, I was cast out into society, and as was identified in the earlier findings, I was given $2.25, some second-hand clothes, and told to go out and survive. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no education. Yep. And I was homeless pretty much until I was 45 years old. I suffered addiction, alcoholism, shame, intense stigma. I found it difficult to look another human being in the eye, to the point where I actually removed myself from society. I went and lived by myself out in a rainforest because I just could not cope. I became quite ill out there, and as was identified earlier, I have a doctorate, which is, I guess, not bad for someone that never went to. What I did was I came back and I made a decision that I couldn't keep living like this. This is at age 45. And I always wanted a school certificate. I dreamed, I had this ambition of being educated. So somehow I fought the system, and I had to fight the system. Centrelink was down on me. They made it very difficult for me, and they still do. They still do. You know, I'm going to apply next week for my first job. Yeah, and Centrelink has really made it hard for me. Yeah, and I noticed that a politician has left. That hasn't escaped my mind, my observation. But you know, it's these things, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of understanding in that broader social service, social network would help heaps. It would really help a lot. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. When I did my doctorate on Forgotten Australians, I did I did an undergrad, and then I did my honours on Forgotten Australians. It was called I'd Like to Tell You a Story, but I'm not sure I can. And it's about the shame and the stigma experienced by Forgotten Australians. My PhD thesis was, I called it Nobody's Children. And I thought that was appropriate because that's the way we feel. It was Nelson Mandela that said that any nation not capable of looking after its children does not deserve to be called a nation. I do not believe Australia deserves to be called a nation. Yeah. There have been 84, well this is 85. This is the 85th report, official report, since 1852. 85 reports on out-of-home care and childcare in Australia. Yep. A report in New South Wales in 1883 suggested that it would be prudent, politically prudent, to spend a few extra pounds taking care of a child before they entered the punitive system or caused greater social damage. We still haven't learnt that lesson. I was asked, I gave evidence at the Royal Commission, and I was asked by the Justice there what I thought. And I said, I think they are doing a fantastic job, and I think it's really good. But I have absolutely no confidence in the political will of going forward. I will leave it there. Thank you.
And we'll hear from our last panellist from the research participants, David Hill. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Mindful of the time, I'll be very brief because I know we're a long way behind. I wanted to begin by congratulating Elizabeth Fernandez and the whole team on this extremely important, though very disturbing report. It's a reminder that every childhood lasts a lifetime. And if you emotionally and physically maim a child, you'll end up with a permanently damaged adult. I'm a child migrant. I'm one of about 10,000 British children who, without their parents, were sent to Australia. It's great to see so many of the old Fairbridge kids who are at the Fairbridge Farm School with me are here today. We all came from very poor backgrounds, usually from broken families or single-parent families, and we came here with the promise of a better life, an unfulfilled promise in most cases. We're not different from the other institutionalised children that you've seen and heard from today. In fact, most of us as child migrants spent time in institutions, children's institutions in England, including myself, and for a while I was in the Barnardos, the giant original Victorian Barnardos home, children's home in Barkingside in Essex. There are many lessons I think we can learn from this report, and not only about the tragedy of the past when it's come to the failure to take adequate care of children, but I hope there are lessons, and I hope we can take the Minister's comments earlier seriously. This is going to throw the spotlight on the care system today, because the really horrifying fact is that children in care today are going to have the same outcomes that children of decades ago that this report is focused on have experienced. When kids come out of the care system today, and there are more kids in care now than ever before, they're still likely to be undereducated, they're going to be underemployed or unemployed, they're far more likely to experience homelessness, participate in the criminal justice system, suffer physical and mental illness, have higher drug and alcohol problems, and suffer social and emotional isolation. Exactly the scenario that we've seen portrayed about kids who were institutionalised decades ago. I was asked to make a comment about resilience and about turning it around. What about you kids that have done well? Well, I have to tell you, over the years, it's irritated me a bit that people have said, what about David Hill and Dr. Patrick O'Brien and Richard Hill, Fairbridge kids who have done extremely well? Well, it has to be understood, I'm not a typical child migrant. I didn't come to Australia until I was 12, nearly 13. I had two brothers. I was only in the Fairbridge Farm School for 3 years. And most importantly, my mum followed us out. And we got back together. In fact, the fact is, most of our childhood was spent in a loving, caring home with me mum. And we got back together. And the typical Fairbridge kid, institutional kid, and I'm not one of them, was in the care system or in an institution long before they were 8 years of age, to spend their entire childhood in a remote farm school, undereducated, all of us had to leave school at 15, and nobody ever putting a loving arm around them. So I don't want my experience to be portrayed as an example of how, if kids make the effort, they can turn it around. If you profoundly disadvantage a child and abuse a child, it makes it very, very difficult for them ever to turn their lives around. And I don't think this report has any feel-good stories or any happy endings, but I hope some good can come of it. Thank you.
Thanks, David. There's a saying I've say quite often that when you're talking to politicians and you're talking to people about, and they do point to the David Hills of the world and say, look, there you go, resilience in a nutshell. No, it's actually, when we stop saying, haven't they done well in spite of, then we know we're actually not talking about a deficit. And we're always talking about a deficit when we put in spite of behind that. Yeah. I thank you very much for the floor. You'd like to thank them again? It's not easy. While we're vacating the stage, thanks, Auntie Martha, that was great. Well, welcome to the stage, Robin Quiggin, Deputy Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Social Justice Commissioner. We're fortunate to have her here today. Robin is a Wurundjeri lawyer based in Sydney. She has worked across a number of legal and policy areas of relevance to Indigenous Australians, including consumer issues, human rights, governance, the arts and heritage. She is currently a Deputy Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Social Justice Commission at the Australian Human Rights Commission. Robin has served on a number of boards, including the Arts Law Centre of Australia and Gadigal Information Service. She is currently Deputy Chair of the Board of the Bangarra Dance Theatre, a Trustee of the Australian Museum, Chair of Westpac Reconciliation Action Plan, a Director of the Board of the Lowitja Institute and a member of the Indigenous Law Bulletin's editorial panel. I'd like to welcome Robin.
Thanks everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners. Can't hear me? Oh, there we go. The microphone will help me. Thanks. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I'd like to begin also by acknowledging my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters and acknowledging the heartfelt, the courage of the sharing. It's an honour to listen to the speakers who shared their stories since I've been here this morning. I think I'm deeply moved, as we all should be and are, by those stories, and I want to thank you for that sharing and that courage. I have my own history, as many Aboriginal people do. I was separated from my family, from my mother at birth. I was adopted into a non-Indigenous family. I was adopted by a woman who'd been fostered through the Depression and had an absolutely horrifying childhood as a result of that, not in an institution, in a private home. And I'd like to echo, David's comments that, all of those of us who start with that separation, I couldn't do anything until I found my way home, nothing. And nothing of any value, never felt whole until I'd found my way home. I think, the experience that the woman who raised me had of her own trauma gave her the encouragement to support me in that journey. And that is, I think, the exception to the rule as well. So many people who were, that I know, who were adopted into private families didn't have that kind of supportive environment. And I'm very lucky to have had that. I am very lucky to have, in the circumstances of my birth in 1960, of a non-Indigenous woman who fell in love as a teenager with a very, very gorgeous Aboriginal man, and who was sent by her family to have me alone in an institution in Sydney. I was very, great heartbreak for her, for him. And so I have a very small understanding of the journey home, a very small understanding. I don't, I'm not saying I have had, the experience of the people who've spoken today. It is a different experience, but that's my little, I just wanted to share with you that's where I come from when I look at this report, and I am enormously moved by the stories in the report, the stories I've heard today, and I just wanted to talk a bit about. I love that people have found words. It's so important in this to talk about these things. It's for me. It was also I didn't have words for it. It's only as an adult that I've learned, and through telling my story and thinking about my story and having to go and get help for my story, that I've found words to talk about what happened to me. And that's why something like this report, I think, and that listening today is so enormously important, because people find the words and are helped to find the words and to put these things on paper and be up for other people, so other people can have a bit of a glimpse into the way that, these stories that have been and these experiences that have been. I think there's been an interest in keeping them silent, and it's just absolutely wonderful to keeping silence over these parts of history. I think it's really important that we're, telling these stories of young people and adults now who've experienced institutional care, and also, there's David spoke about and other people spoke about those who are in care currently and those who are transitioning out of care. I wanted to talk to you just a little bit. It's, I guess, a bit of a different perspective, and just talk about the fact that we just published our native title and our social justice and native title report. It's an account of the experience of human rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the last year. And what we've said is that evidence base with when it holds at its heart the voice of the people who are affected by different issues, is incredibly invaluable, in fact essential for any kind of policy directions or making of legislation. So a report like this is so important for development of policy for people who've had these experiences, and those who are in care, as I said, and those transitioning out of care. They are absolutely invaluable resources, and we at the Human Rights Commission always call for those evidence-based documents and the research to be at the heart of any kind of law or policy direction. What I also just wanted to flag you, and it's a bit of a dry subject, but it is important, that Australia has signed up to a number of international human rights instruments, and many of them give us as a nation, both at the Commonwealth, state and territory level, legal obligations to look after children, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to look after children, to make the rights of children incredibly, really important. Exactly, that's right.
So it's a lot of words.
We need implementation of those. If we took those human rights obligations to heart, married them up with the evidence, we would get proper policy development. And you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. No, that's right.
We're terrifying children to the minute.
Yeah.
Spraying them with Africa.
Yeah.
Flying them.
Completely in breach of our international human rights obligations. You're absolutely right. In breach of the rights of the child, in breach of rights of people who are incarcerated, in breach of our human rights. We are absolutely in breach of our international human rights obligations.
I don't get why we speak so much.
Well, I guess what we think is we need to keep reminding the government that it has signed up to these obligations.
They signed up. Do it, or go to jail.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Go to jail yourself.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Feed them through under the door, so the food has to be that thick for them to eat.
We need implementation, you're absolutely right, of those human rights obligations. We're hoping that the government will ratify the optional protocol on the Convention Against Torture. What that will mean is that every place where anybody is held, hospitals, children's homes, prisons will be, there'll be random investigation, not investigation, but looking at monitoring. Sorry, monitoring is the word. It's as good as we've got. That's,
some of them are completely out of control today.
yeah.
In our days, we weren't completely out of control to be treated like that.
Yes.
There are two different aspects here.
Mm-hmm.
The children of today are a little bit more out there than we were, but yet we were horrendously treated in comparison to what they get treated today.
I think what we want, from my perspective, from the Human Rights Commission's perspective, what we want to see is a government that complies with our obligations. If we did that, we would have better institutions and better systems and better support for kids coming out of care. It would, if we, the human rights frameworks, I think, do provide guidance, and in a landscape where we do seem to have lost, you know, what is fair treatment, and we have so much evidence of really, you know, horrendous treatment. I think it's the only leverage we've got, really, to say, here, we have signed up and said we want to be regarded as a good nation in the international arena. We want a seat on the Security Council in the international arena. So the fact that we've signed up to those obligations does mean that we can keep saying to government, you have legal international human rights obligations and we need to meet them. So I really get that, you know, that is it seems really kind of airy-fairy and just out of reach, but it's one of the few ways that we can keep holding our governments and our bureaucracies and the officers who are ultimately, you know, the people at the coalface and who need to be held to account and be called to behave well. We keep thinking back up, we do have those obligations, and we can keep calling. We can reasonably and legitimately keep saying, this is what you signed up for. We need to meet these obligations. So I understand it seems very, you know, it's all far away, it's all, you know, it's not right here, and we have urgent need, there is no doubt about that. But I would just say that I think there is relevance to keep saying, you've signed up to this stuff, you need to do it. Well, I reckon I've probably said enough. Hand it over to you fellas.
Robin, look, they're well aware that these are very emotive issues, and people feel very strongly about those. So, but we are a bit behind time, so I might ask our next two speakers if they could push it down a little bit. Thank you very much. We have Rebecca Gray and Terry Cheney, a Research Program Manager from Relationships Australia and Chief Executive from Link Up New South Wales.
Hi, my name's Rebecca, and thank you for that introduction. And I just wanted to start by saying that it's a real honour to speak at this event today. And I feel very moved by what I've heard, so if I falter, please forgive me. I'd like to continue by acknowledging that we meet on country and the Bedigal people, the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the audience today. So Relationships Australia is an independent, not-for-profit, non-government organisation that some of you may know. Our aim is to enhance relationships for people's personal and social well-being. We're the auspice agency of Wattle Place, which is based in Western Sydney, thanks to funding from the New South Wales Government. We offer quite a wide range of services, which I think speaks to the ongoing needs, some of which we've heard today. And so I wanted to spend a moment talking about the challenges and the fact that as an organisation working out of Wattle Place, we bear witness to what people live with. Adequate health care would be nice, dentistry in particular. We also help with find and connect services across a number of states and locating hundreds of records despite the fact that there's considerable challenges, missing and incomplete records, long waiting times. The other thing that we feel is noteworthy from our perspective is that we sense a lack of understanding for what service users need and how people view them, complex trauma and the stigmatisation and extensive needs. And we often have to support service users in addition to what our aim is as an organisation to deal with the stigmatisation and lack of understanding with other agencies and government bodies. So in a sense, we feel vicariously relieved by seeing this report and that service users' experiences have been witnessed. We were approached in 2012 to join the research project as an ARC linkage partner, and we jumped at the chance. The report provides a window through which readers can view the ongoing challenges and adaptations that people live with and gain a greater understanding, we hope, for the work and what's needed. The report makes for harrowing reading, and the strength, courage and capacity of the research participants who describe their lives is staggering. As readers might imagine, the workforce that provide support and listen to client accounts are changed by that experience. It's incredibly rewarding work and life-changing. And we feel that the team at Wattle Place and Find and Connect wish to acknowledge what a privilege it is to work with you all and formally acknowledge your strengths and courage. And we hope that the resources and funding required to effectively support you is strengthened and improved, and that it's not just another report. Thank you.
Good morning, or it may even be afternoon by now. Thank you, everyone. As an Anouan man on someone else's country, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and thank you for having me on your country. Despite the fact I've lived here for many years, this is still someone else's home. And we forget that. And quite often, when we're talking about forgotten Australians and child migrants, we actually do forget they were children because we have a label. We all have labels, some good, some bad. We had a minister who left, and I must admit, I was quite perplexed by that. This was going to be a non-political suck-up opportunity for some more funding. But no longer. Marie Walker, are you still here? I didn't think so. There's the two most important people in community service in New South Wales walked out the door. And I understand people are busy, but after 18 years, some of you people who have had all these hardships placed on you deserve better. I want to just quickly to say, initially I was introduced as Dr. Terry Chenery. Thank you for that honour. I don't have a doctorate. My wife's not that understanding to give me that time. But at the same time, I look at the people who do have them that were standing up here a moment ago, and I go, all power to you. And, you deserve that kudos. But as David said, for every one of you, there's another 1,000 out there who suffer too much, who don't have that strength and don't have that ability to do so. My mum was a stolen generation member, and we often forget about the intergenerational trauma. Only 2 months ago, I met my uncle for the first time. I'm 45. He's on the other side of the country. Now, we can fly there in a couple of hours nowadays, but it's taken 45 years for me to meet him. My mum saw him across the wire fence at the orphanage, and the day he got shipped out to the farms was the last time he saw her. She died 20-odd years ago, never seeing him again. But that's enough of the dull and the dreary, because sadly, that's the way we become to label everything here. And you are more than labels, you are people, you are strong, you are charismatic, you have those power in that hands. You don't have the authority to change things, and that's a sad point. Okay. The people who have the authority to change things are the two people who walked out that door. Okay. Now, I was going to sit here and blow sunshine out the proverbial. There's $40 million over 4 years being spent on the Premier's Youth Initiative homelessness, which fell into the hands of Brad. Now, to his credit, he didn't actually stand up here and give you a political spin. I was going to do that, and not because of that, anything other than me trying to suck up a little bit for a couple extra dollars. So $40 million over that period of time is significant money. There's also a family restoration program, which is similar money. There's also a family group conferencing, which is similar money. All very good things to be done. But as it's been pointed out more eloquently than I have today, they are just words, and they are just dollars, and they are just figures. My job here today is to respond to the report, and as much as I wanted to sit here and be all chirpy and so forth, the stories I've heard today didn't induce sadness in me, but they gave me another focus. And I'm not going to sit here and try to start that discussion up again, but I feel for poor Robin. The President of the Human Rights Commissioner has given her all over the last couple of years for this, and to great personal sacrifice. And despite the fact that you may have given her a bit of a heckle, what we should be doing is going, they're the champions. They are the only people who have the voice on a large scale. Now, I'm not for one moment trying to minimise everything that we have, because there's strength in numbers, but numbers only come through individuals getting together. You have that power. You need to make sure those with authority have your speech and have your backing, because without it, they will pick you off one by one. They did it when you were kids. Do not let it happen to you again. You need to use your numbers, and you need to use the numbers of those who weren't victims of a system. When you use those people and you leverage it, you have strength. And through strength and through numbers, you will create change. This report has started it. Don't let it disappear. Stay strong. Thank you. You are, but together you can do it. Don't let them bring you down. Stay strong, stay united. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for those two. We are heading towards our last presentation now. It's from Mark Courtney. Now, Mark has come a very, very long way to give us a presentation, so if you could just bear with us and listen to Mark's. And this is where we come to the putting some of this into practice and what is the best practice that is happening in this space around the world, because as we've heard long and hard today, where people are a bit sick of words, a bit sick of platitudes, they're a bit sick of promises, but there has to be a better way, because if the system is broken, we can't keep on doing what we are doing. We need to actually do something differently. And I think there are some evidences around the world where people do it differently, and there are some opportunities that we have to make it better for people to transition from out-of-home care to adulthood and to independence, not with the deficit that they currently have. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, past and present, and also thank the university for inviting me to participate in this and for participating in the study, and then to thank all the people whose voices are represented by this report. These are not easy stories to tell. They're stories that need to be told, both to benefit the folks who suffered by being in care many years ago, but I think also so that Australians in Australia can do something differently going forward. And I don't know that much about, partly because there isn't that much research on it, but I will agree with the statement that undoubtedly some of the things that were happening to people decades ago are still happening here in Australia. In any country I've been in the world, that's true. So I'm going to cut this, I'm going to make this short. The PowerPoint is available, but I know I'm the last one here, and I'm sort of between you and lunch. And I'm also inspired to just try to make a couple of points that I would do with this talk. First, let me say, I don't think we have it right in the States at all, but with respect to the transition from care to adulthood, things have changed a lot in my lifetime. I started working in the child welfare system in California back in the late 80s. I worked for 5 years in a group home agency, small group homes, with transition age youth. And we celebrated 18th birthdays by saying, woohoo, you're an adult, and by the way, you're on your own. And quite often that was walking young people down to the homeless shelter and things like that. We had no transition planning, but I went into the field as the policy started to change in the U.S. And I'm going to talk about what bearing witness, and I really view my research, the research I'm going to talk about today, and this research as bearing witness to the experiences of people and using that to try to benefit them, but also to try to benefit the folks coming afterwards. So I'm going to just provide some selected findings from my research, describing outcomes generally to make the point that we need to do better, and then to make the point that, in fact, we know now, at least in the U.S. context, that we can do better. There's evidence that government can act differently and that those actions can make a difference for young people leaving care. And then I'll close with just an encouragement and a warning that if Australia moves in the direction that the US has, which is to provide care into adulthood, not expect people to start their adulthood by being rendered quote unquote independent, that you'll come to terms with the fact that providing care to adults is just different in fundamental ways than it is to providing care to minors. So how do foster youth in the US fare during the transition to adulthood? We know a lot about that in the US, primarily from this study. It's got a long title there, but we affectionately call it the Midwest Study. It was a study following young people making the transition out of care, starting in the wake of a piece of legislation called the Foster Care Independence Act in 1999 that doubled the amount of money that we were spending in the US on transition services from about $70 million. That law, again called the Independent Living Initiative, notice the word independence here, was created when I worked in the system back in the 1980s. It allocated $70 million to try to prepare young people independent living skills so that on their 18th birthday they would be independent. As you can tell from the tone of my voice, I was skeptical about that then. I remain skeptical now. This study came in the wake of revisiting that policy because of studies that I and other people did in the 1990s that showed that young people weren't doing too well when they were aging out of care. So these three states, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois, said, let's do a study. We're implementing this new policy from 1999. We now have twice as much money as we used to have to prepare young people for independence. And an interesting thing about these three states is that for reasons I won't get into here, Illinois was one of the very few jurisdictions in the U.S. that allowed young people to remain in care till their 21st birthday if they chose to do so. Iowa and Wisconsin, these other two states, did what virtually every other state in the country did at that point in time, including California, my home state, basically discharged young people on their 18th birthday. So we followed a group of over 700 young people in these three states, and we interviewed them at 17, 19, 21, 23, and 26. And as you can see, we were very successful doing that. We interviewed 96% of the young people who met this sample description of being in care on their 17th birthday for at least a year. And we were able to follow at least 4/5 of those young people all the way to age 26. So let me just put that out there. That's possible. I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that here if you had the will to do that. And we learned a lot in doing that. So what did we find? Here's the bad news first. Trends across a variety of outcomes are problematic. And without getting into lots of numbers here, I'll just say that any parent, if you had 10 children, let's say, would be horrified if half the young men spent time in jail between their 18th and 21st birthday. You'd be unhappy if half of them were unemployed at any point well into their 20s. So basically we found declining engagement in education, poor educational outcomes, poor labor market outcomes. They had children. Many of them were non-resident children. In fact, 60% of the children from the young men in the study were not living with their fathers at the time we talked to them. Troubling levels of justice system involvement, and not surprisingly, given the traumatic backgrounds these young people came from, lots of problems in areas of mental health, behavioral health, et cetera. Outcomes varied by gender, with men doing worse. But the good news here is that policy matters, and I'll come to that in just a minute. Because we had this natural experiment of looking at what happened to young people aging out in Illinois when the government there continued to provide care to 21, and these other two states, we were able to make the case that, in fact, it would be a good idea to allow young people to remain in care. I'll come back to some specifics about that. And then despite the sobering picture overall, so averages can be misleading. When you say on average, half the young people, young men, spent some time in jail between 17 and 21, that's true, but most of those jail stays were short. First of all, very few of those young men were, spending their life in jail. But moreover, about half of these young people amazingly showed their resilience in graduating from high school, going to some college, having children, but keeping those children, not giving them up to the state, and generally avoiding a lot of the outcomes that we saw. So we do this study, the Midwest Study, and the question that policymakers ask themselves is, what's a concerned parent to do based on those poor outcomes? And I already mentioned we had this natural experiment between Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And we found that 17-year-olds in care in Illinois, so we start at 17 in all three of these places, and lo and behold, because of this policy, the first finding I had to share with people, what's surprising to you? I said, well, it's surprising how many of these young people actually choose to remain in care, given that the government ministers when I would give talks like this early in my career, would all say, well, they don't want it, they hate us anyway. So there's no point in extending care because they never take advantage of it. Well, that was proven definitively incorrect by this study. 80% of the young people in Illinois were still in care on their 19th birthday. Half were still in care on their 21st birthday. And Illinois wasn't even doing a particularly good job of extended care. But it was, at least in principle, doing what a responsible parent would do, which is I continue to care for my adult children. I continue to provide support for. They're 20 and 23 years old, and I expect to do that as long as they need the help. So what we found is Illinois, kids in Illinois spent 2 more years in care. Now, we've done lots of studies since then, taking advantage of this rich data set we have, and we find all kinds of benefits of that. So first of all, we found that young people associated with this policy, young people are about twice as likely to go to college as if they were not allowed to stay in care. Each additional year in care was associated with about a 17% increase in earnings at ages 23 and 26. That's big. I don't know about you, I'd love a 17% raise. Delayed pregnancy, young women were about 40% less likely to get pregnant between 17 and 19, and 2/3 of those pregnancies were unwanted. Reduced crime, particularly among females, delayed homelessness, and also we studied young fathers and their involvement with their children even when they weren't living with them, and we found that the young people who remained in care were much more likely to be involved with their children, and that was a good thing for them and their children. And lastly, big surprise, if you as a state decide that you're going to continue to provide care for people, they're much more likely to take advantage of your services than if you kick them out the door at 18. So we have a new policy in the U.S. It's called the Fostering Connections to Success Act, and the first thing I note here is the language is fundamentally different. For 20 years, our law was the Independent Living Initiative. We're going to make you independent. Even the Foster Care Independence Act I found really ironic. Yeah, it's easy to make them independent of foster care, you just kick them out and they're independent. This law actually acknowledges the importance of social connections. It allows young people to remain in care, but it asks them to go to school, go to work, be in job training, or if they have a health condition that prohibits them from doing that, they can still remain in care, and then the state's responsible for trying to help them along the way. All the other policies we have, the money, the $140 million, that's still in place. So we have this, but it's a state option. And I'll be honest with you, only 26 states at this point have adopted this policy. But nevertheless, it's hopeful that they have that option, and some states in the U.S. are choosing to exercise it. And because of that state option, we have a federalist system in the U.S., and even within states, we have some county-rented states like California, the one I'm studying right now. So there's a lot of variability depending on where you are in the country. Okay, so now we have a policy that says, let's not abandon these young people at 18. How do we best parent young adults? And here's where I'm going to kind of cut through these slides very quickly, but tell you a little bit about the study to, again, sort of demonstrate that if you're committed, if you have the political will, you can, in fact, follow young people, listen to their voices, and learn from them along the way, which is what the state of California is doing right now. California, to put this in perspective, has about 20% of the foster children in the U.S. Los Angeles County alone has over 35,000 children in foster care. And the state of California now has about 7,000 young adults in foster care over the age of 18, 18 or over. So my study right now is called CalYouth, California Youth Transitions to Adulthood Study, and it's really a privilege to go. I live in Illinois now, but to be able to go back 25 years after I practiced in California and work with people in the state of California, the state government, the county governments, the philanthropic communities, not-for-profits, and the California Youth Connection, which is an organization of current and former foster youth. Those are the partners of this study. And basically what we're doing is we're focusing on talking to young people. So again, we're starting when they're still in care at 17. We've already interviewed over 700 young people at 17 and followed up at 19 with over 80% of them. We also, because of a partnership with government, have access to all kinds of other data that we can use on all of the young people who are aged out in California, not just the 700, the thousands that have aged out over the last 10 years or so. And we can look at things like education, employment, receipt of government aid, and arrests. So that's CalYouth. And the questions we're trying to answer is, what difference does it make to extend care? Yes, Illinois looked like it did better than Iowa and Wisconsin, but now we have 26 states experimenting with this. So we want to learn from California because California is the largest provider of foster care in the U.S. And it also has a policy that's much more inclusive than many of the other states. It's really written by rights attorneys. It's a rights benefit law, And so in principle, it's about as inclusive as you could get in terms of policy. So you want to learn, not only does this policy make a difference in the outcomes for young people, but what is it about the policy and practice that makes a difference? So just to give you a sense, we've interviewed caseworkers. 95% of caseworkers for transition-age youth in California participated in our study. So caseworkers actually are well-intentioned people as well, believe it or not, and at least in California. And they want to know what's happening with these young people, and so they've participated in surveys we've done of them, and we've had a very good success with that. I'll just share one thing we found from the workers. So if you start doing this and you bear witness again, not just to what happened in the past, because you need to do that, but to bear witness to what you're doing now, then you're going to identify much more quickly the things you're not doing that aren't going well. So one of the things that we asked them is, what about housing for these young adults? Because young adults aren't all going to stay in their foster home. My kids didn't stay in my home, right? So young people, they need to learn to live on their own. They live with other young people, et cetera. And lo and behold, you find out that only about half of the workers felt that there were adequate available housing options in their county for these young people. So that's a real issue, that the counties and the state have to work around creating housing options that work and are appropriate for these young people. We asked the workers, what are the challenges to policy implementation? And the main thing they said, again, echoing what I just mentioned, over 4/5 of them said there's just not enough places for these young people to live that are appropriate, that we can make work for them. And then not enough services. So early in the implementation of their law, California deserves credit for shining a light on its own practice. And that light is showing that policy is great, we have the best of intentions, but the implementation, to get back to the discussion of implementation, needs to improve clearly. We're also talking to the young people, and we're talking to them about everything, all the outcomes that we're interested in, but we're also talking about things like, you know, do you have enough support? Do you have people to talk to give you advice, emotional support, to loan you money if you needed that? What about your relations with your family? We know from my research that youth aging out of care in the U.S. are not, 75% of them are very close to at least one or more members of their family. And so the state is co-parenting, in fact. It's in a relationship with the families of these young people, whether it wants to be or not, and to act as if these kids are orphans really does a disservice to many of them, because most of them actually have lived in their families for a long period of time before they came into care. So we ask about all these kinds of things that you see here. We've, as I mentioned, talked to over 700 young people back at baseline, and 95% of them were willing to tell their story to us. So again, I've been approaching young people in foster care as minors, but also as young adults for about 25 years now. And when I tell them, I want to talk to you about your experiences because I'm going to share that with the powers that be, they say, sign me up. Because they care about what happens after them, to the folks who come after them. And so we found lots of things like this. This speaks to how close these young people are to their current caregiver. The vast majority say they're actually pretty close to their current caregiver. They even have good things to say about group home staff, believe it or not. Most of them feel favorably toward the group home staff. Nevertheless, being in family-like care results in young people feeling closer to their caregivers. But as you look across this slide, you also see they're very close to their relatives. And so, again, this is a dilemma for us, right? Because these are young people who are choosing to stay in care. This is at 17, but California, 80% have stayed in care. Yet, they're close to their families. They're saying, I want you, state, to continue to support me, and I want you to understand that I have a family. And I actually want you to help me manage the relationships I have with my family so that they can be beneficial to me and to my family. These young people have challenges, right? About half of them have a mental health or behavioral health disorder. They're getting a lot of help with it because they're staying in care. This is the other thing you're going to find here. This is the left side of the slide very quickly. California allows young people to make a choice. They can leave care and come back. And while I mentioned that about 80% when we talk to them at 19 are in care, that little 13% there is the young people who left care and then said, can I, opt back in? That, I thought I was ready to be on my own, but I'm not really ready to be on my own. I had a daughter who left home a year early, so I'm familiar with this personally. But, we have a strong relationship and she relies on us and we love her to this day. But that's just something young people do. They'll opt for independence. So if you're going to continue to provide care into adulthood, realize you're dealing with an adult. They're going to make choices. They're going to want to review those choices, and we need to have policies that allow them to do that. The other thing that becomes really apparent when you provide extended foster care is that foster homes are not going to be the only kind of living arrangement you have to arrange. And if you look, these are bolded, these first two arrangements. Supervised independent living, basically in California, means that a young person gets a check between $800, $900, and the support of the social services agency, but they go and live on their own, but they're still in care. They're still in a protective order of the court and still responsibility of the care system. Now they're living out there in an apartment with no 24-hour adult supervision. It's a totally different form of care than somebody who's, you know, a minor in care where you have an adult looking in on them every day or living with them. Supported housing is for young people who have more behavioral and emotional problems. But again, that's a placement in the community. It is not 24-hour supervision. If you add those two numbers up, you see that half of the young people in California at age 19 are actually living out in the community without 24-hour adult supervision. And that has to be acceptable. We have to make that work if we're going to provide extended care. And then I'll conclude this with pointing out that even when you have a policy that's the right policy, as California does, this was really frustrating to my state partners when I shared the report with them. They said, there must be an error here. You say that 14% of the young people who are still in care have been homeless since the last time you talked to them was 17. I said, there's no error. You have a policy providing care, but some of these young people find themselves in living arrangements where they get evicted, right? Or they opt out because the living arrangement's not working for them. And for some period of time, they in fact are homeless until you are able to re-engage with them and find them another place to live. So even under the best of circumstances, we're going to have to learn from our mistakes, if you like, and where the gaps in services are. The good news here, though, as you can see, is that young people who left care were over twice as likely to become homeless. And in fact, we're getting ready to issue a report now, and I can't share the details of it, but in virtually every dimension we look across in California, so more recent than my last study, allowing young people to rely on the states, their choice. They're not in jail, they can leave anytime they want, but allowing them to rely on the state as a parent results in benefits in employment, reduction of risk behaviors, reduction of crime, all the things that I as a parent want to see for my young adult children. So let me just conclude with saying, again, it's really a privilege to be here. I think the LOFA study is really important to show how well, or in this case, how poorly, the state and its voluntary sector partners have parented in Australia. And I certainly see my work in California and later over the last 25 years that way. It's just trying to bear witness to what we did right, in many cases, most cases, what we did wrong. And I think LOFA is a rare and needed example of a look in the more distant past. We don't know what happened in my country to young people who were in care back from the 30s to the 80s. And we just don't know much at all, frankly. And so I think knowing that's very important. It allows you to own up to what happened and hopefully to help those people now in their lives. And then I think follow-up studies also allow us to help learn how to do things better, right, going forward. What we can do for the folks who were subjected to the things that folks have shared their stories with today is to try to help them at this point. But the other thing we can do is we can acknowledge our failures and try to move forward and learn in real time now so that we don't do those things in the future. So thanks again.
Thanks, Mark. We now have Elizabeth who will wrap up the proceedings for the morning, and I'm sure Elizabeth won't keep you too long from your lunch. Will you, Elizabeth? Thank you very much.
First of all, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First of all, to Andrew for chairing this function so efficiently and for presenting our speakers and for being very supportive to our speakers in their presentations. I must thank Andrew also for his collaboration on this project through ACWA and for committing resources and staff time to assist with this project. Thank you, Andrew. The Minister, Brad Hazzard, has left, but I would like to place on record our thanks for launching this research report and for his messages of support. I'm optimistic that his support will enable us to implement some of our recommendations. And we certainly will be following up with the department in relation to this. I'd like to thank Commissioner Robin Quiggin for her presence. We'd like to express our gratitude for your presence here today, for your endorsement of the significance of this research, and also for your acknowledgement of the challenges that the forgotten Australians, the child migrants, and the stolen generations experience on a day-to-day basis in pursuing both services and justice outcomes. Thank you, Robin. Mark Courtney, we're deeply indebted to you for traveling to Australia specifically to participate in this launch and to present your longitudinal research on outcomes for adult care leavers in the United States. No doubt, the international comparative perspective is extremely important for policy development in relation to contemporary out-of-home care systems in Australia, and we appreciate being able to be exposed to that data. Thank you also for your continuing support to the research project as a whole, and also for writing the preface to the report. Thank you, Mark. To participants in this research, you must be commended for your commitment to the cause of the forgotten Australians, the child migrants, and the stolen generations in giving so much of time in participating in the research, in surveys, in interviews, and in focus groups. And your experience, your depth of knowledge about the issues, and your perseverance in bringing this agenda to the public space has really enriched our research and the outcomes of this research. And we certainly hope that the findings from this research and this report will play some part in terms of your continuing efforts for justice and redress in this context. And we would like to be able to continue to work with you in whatever way possible in this respect, in disseminating the findings and using the findings in order to lobby for the outcomes that you are committed to. I would especially like to thank Ellen, Martha, Brian, and David for their inspiring presentations, for the insights that they've shared with us, and we are deeply grateful that you could share so courageously with us your personal experiences and also the challenges that you have confronted. The messages that you've offered to us through your presentations are really appreciated. To Rebecca, to Rebecca Gray of Relationships Australia and Terry Chenery of Link Up Services, once again, we'd like to thank you for the very informative presentation, and you've reminded us of the challenges in terms of providing services, and also the very strong message to all participant groups to persevere in lobbying the government for change. Thank you very much. I have a long list. To the attendees, to all of you who are present today, thank you for being here to celebrate this occasion, and through your presence, extend support to the forgotten Australians, child migrants, and stolen generations. Thank you for attending. I must thank our partners. The research would not have been possible without the collaboration of our research partners, AQUA, Relationships Australia, Alliance for Forgotten Australians, Families Australia, Berry Street Victoria, Micah Projects, and Catholic Care. You've given very generously of your resources and time to support the research. There were a number of practitioners, yes, practitioners, policymakers, representatives from government, and also representatives of different advocacy groups who participated in a critical reference group that steered the research. And we really benefited from your input at different strategic points of the research. This included an Indigenous advisory group, and we would like to extend our appreciation for your continuing involvement in the project. In compiling the report over the last 8 weeks, we have had a number of individuals who have committed a lot of time to reading and rereading drafts of the report. And I'd like to mention them and thank them especially: Wendy Foote, Rebecca Gray, Stella Conroy, David Hill, Deirdre Cheers, Tiffany McComsey, Paul Gray, and Terry Chenery. And I apologize if I've left out anyone else, but we really thank you very much for assisting us in refining this report and achieving this outcome. I'd like to acknowledge the assistance of a number of people who've assisted in the function today. Marty of University of New South Wales, Catherine of Aqua for assisting with photography, Brian for filming the event, Lisa Pronesti from the faculty for her personal assistance with all the details of the function and making the faculty's resources available to us in organizing the event. Thanks also to Sylvia for her efficiency in attending to all the minute details of the launch function, and to Hira and other volunteers who are here to help us today. Finally, tribute to the research team, my colleagues in the research team, Dr. Jung-Suk Lee for her collaboration and support throughout the project, and particularly with the data analysis. Dr. Hazel Blunden, whose significant role in conducting interviews and focus groups across Australia ensured the breadth and depth of the data that we have presented in this report, and ensured that we captured the voices of our research participants very effectively. I must thank also Dr. Patricia McNamara, who managed the data collection in Melbourne. Patricia, Hazel, and Sylvia together handled a voluminous amount of qualitative data, and were exceptional in terms of how they captured the perceptions and the voices of the research participants. So thank you very much. Paul Conifer was highly involved in the initial stages of the project, particularly in getting the project off the ground and engaging research partners. So thank you, Paul. So thanks, Jung, Hazel, Trish, Sylvia, and Paul. And once again, to all of you, thank you very much for being at this function and making it a success. Thank you.